Thanksgiving planning always sneaks up on us. Every year I say I'm going to get ahead of it, and then I don't. Potlucks, the big family feast. But this year I'm keeping things easy and stress-free with Whole Foods Market. It's my one-stop shop for everything I need all month long. From quality organic produce to great prices on turkey and amazing deals on baking essentials. Plus, their 365 brand always keeps my pantry stocked with the basics without breaking the budget. And for the days when life gets too busy, their grab-and-go sides are a lifesaver. The creamy mashed russet potatoes and sea salt and cracked pepper green beans are perfect for potlucks, quick dinners, or last-minute Friendsgiving plans. Nobody needs to know I didn't actually cook it myself, right? I love browsing their produce sales for fresh ingredients to make casseroles and classic sides that taste like home. And if you want to skip the cooking altogether, Whole Foods Market Catering has you covered. From turkey to dessert, all made with the same better ingredients and high standards that you'd expect. Make sure to order by November 25th to reserve your bird, your sides, and your sweets. This Thanksgiving, save more, stress less, and make it delicious. All with Whole Foods Market. Shop everything you need for Thanksgiving now at Whole Foods Market. Oh, and happy Thanksgiving.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony Nippy Ames, and this is A Little Bit Culty.
We woke up from a cult, and that journey was captured in The Vow on HBO and in my memoir, Scarred.
Now, in this podcast, we break down the shame and secrets that make these experiences so destructive with honest conversations on how seemingly benign groups can cross into the cultiverse and how to spot and recover from trouble if it happens to you.
Each week, we bring in experts, survivors, and whistleblowers to explore red flags, resilience, and even share a few laughs, because sometimes you gotta laugh.
Subscribe to our Patreon for early and ad-free listening, some live Q&A, and exclusive content at patreon.com/alittleBitCulty.
Welcome to Season 8 of A Little Bit Culty.
What happens when the end of the world doesn't come? Twice.
What do you do when your mom predicts nuclear war, builds a $25 million fallout shelter, and then calls it divine intervention when the apocalypse never arrives? We're back with part 2 of our conversation with Sean Prophet, son of Church Universal and Triumphant. Oh, and if you didn't listen to part 1, please do that.
You know the drill.
You know the drill. Enjoy. Welcome back to part 2. Before we get into, Sean, how you decided to leave, set us up a little bit with what was going on regarding the end of the world and the doomsday and nuclear war and the massive fallout shelters. Set the scene for the end of your time there.
Yes. So my mother predicted nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And this was sort of a culmination of her kind of Cold War orientation. She'd always been very anti-communist and believed that, the godless Soviets were going to take over the world and all of that. And this sort of escalated during the 1980s. And as you might recall, the Cold War sort of reached its fever pitch in 1985 with all the rhetoric and Reagan calling the Soviets the evil empire and all that kind of thing. So after they shot down the Korean airliner in, I believe it was 1983, that's when her rhetoric really started to turn apocalyptic. She wrote a book called Saint Germain on Prophecy that was released in 86. And then she gave a dictation in New York City in 1987 saying, basically it was October of 87. And she said, ere 24 months have passed, there shall be a confrontation and a reckoning if something is not done. And the something she was talking about was building missile defenses, which, as you might know, there's a film out right now called House of Dynamite talking about this very issue. And it's the inability of the United States to stop incoming missiles. My mom was very upset about that. And she thought that we should, she was totally behind Reagan's Star Wars initiative, the idea that we could shoot down somehow thousands of missiles coming in and nothing would get through. When she got into this whole Cold War mentality, that because we were not building these defenses, that it was going to allow us to be destroyed as a nation. And she's not the only one to have said that. And of course, a lot of people were very afraid, from the 1950s forward of nuclear war. So she tapped into that kind of primal fear in the country, but she spiritualized it into these messages. And, she predicted specific dates, like 24 months, right? So that would have been October of 1989. Now, by that time, we had in about the summer of 88, that's when we really got serious about the shelter planning and building. And it was a monumental effort. I mean, I can't even describe this whole thing. You have to almost see the pictures. And I have a few pictures in the book about that. But we built a fully state-of-the-art underground bomb shelter for 756 people. And the idea was that we would be underground for 7 months, and then we had enough food stored that we could eat for 7 years, and all underground. And so this involved a massive underground warehouse and then 6 large living pods that were all inside of steel culverts, right? So they were completely self-contained. We had generators. We had 500,000 gallons of diesel fuel, 120,000 gallons of propane, about 120,000 gallons of gasoline stored. We had vehicles. We had, farm implements to be able to farm after the war was over. We prepared ourselves in practically every way that you can think of for 7 years without civilization.
Wow. And you estimate it cost
25 million.
But that's just that's just the costs of the materials.
Yeah, we spent about $25 million in direct costs buying materials and food and equipment. And there was also involved in that whole project about, I'd say in the beginning, it was 10 or 20 people involved in the engineering. We had a full engineering department. The blueprints for the shelters was about this thick of D-size construction drawings, right? I mean, literally that thick. And we thought of everything. I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but...
Was it ever completed and function? Did it reach that stage?
Yeah.
Wow.
So after we designed these shelters, right, we built them. And that involved about 200 people, 200, men and women working nonstop, anywhere from 12 to 14 hours a day for 2 years. To fabricate these things, we built a shop building to fabricate all the parts. We trucked them to the site. We put them together. We installed all the fuel tanks. We built the central storage building. Materials alone cost $10 million. And it was a huge warehouse, 300 feet, twin arches, 300 feet long. We put trucks inside of there. We had, it's massive. And this is something, I have construction footage of all of this, which I'm planning to use in this documentary I've been working on for about 20 years. But make a long story short, if you counted the labor and if you try to reproduce what we did there in today's dollars, I'm estimating $150 million.
Wow.
Wild.
And what's the state of it now? Did
it ever get used?
Well, there was a huge fuel spill that happened right after the prophecies. So, make a long story short, we had 2 shelter drills, and each of those nights, my mother predicted that the war is going to happen tonight, and so we all had to be in by a certain time. We had to, button up the shelters and get ready to survive, and we were all praying furiously. The first time, kind of, I think, praying to prevent the war, but by the second time, I think she had decided that, the judgment needed to happen. And I think there was more, it was a spiritual idea. And I go into a lot of the background on this in my book, but it was both a spiritual idea and also we had committed ourselves to this. I mean, we had spent every penny that we had and then some building these shelters, and we didn't really have a plan B. Right. So by the night of the second drill, she's calling for this war to happen because we had completely committed ourselves to it. And then when it didn't, it was, that was very shocking to a lot of people.
How is that spun after that?
Yeah, she's not going to admit. And, to this day, there are people who deny that she was calling for this to happen. But I was there and I, typed out the prayer for world judgment that we distributed and we all gave. And there's no question about what she wanted. And there's also a story in the book where I talk about how my sister and I were with her privately and gave this prayer the morning that we went into the shelters. So it was definitely something that she had decided needed to happen at that point. And, that's a very scary thing when you're a cult leader and you decide that the world should be spiritually judged. I think that's the most dangerous thing we ever did, because it's not that we had the power to do it. Of course, we didn't, but we thought we did, and we made that decision. And probably the worst moral abdication I've ever been involved in.
What was it like when it didn't happen for you? What did you think? Did you doubt more? Did you?
I was shocked, and I was actually angry because I felt like, we had done all of this work and spent all of our money that we had accumulated over 50 years, basically. Well, it wasn't 50 back then, it was 30. But we had spent all the money that we'd accumulated over 30 years. And instead of building a functional community and doing something with our lives, we had committed ourselves to this premise that the world was going to be destroyed. And so when it didn't happen, there was a feeling of betrayal.
Sure.
And I was really angry that my mom had roped me into agreeing with her and giving this prayer for world destruction. I felt guilt, I felt rage. It's the worst thing I've ever been involved in.
Could you express that? Could you? Did you feel like it was okay to go on like, hey, Mom, like,
What were you thinking,
At
Mom?
the time, no.
what's going on here?
At the time, no. At the time, it was, how can I say it? When you're all in on a belief system, there can be these examples of cognitive rupture. And this was definitely that. But people don't always react well to cognitive rupture. A lot of people will double down. And you would think that it's like, okay, if you have a firm belief and you get immediate evidence that that belief is wrong, you should change your mind. But that's not how humans work.
Mm-hmm.
So they will spiritualize the failure. They will rationalize the failure. And that's exactly what she did. She gave a dictation by El Moria saying, effectively, you prevented the war with your prayers. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense if we were praying for the war to happen. So there's a big disconnect between the official story and what actually happened.
Do you think she actually believed it?
I mean, if you read my sister's book, Erin, who wrote Prophet's Daughter, I think at that time, Erin was in control of a lot of what was happening and a lot of the specifics of the prophecies. So Erin admits that in her book. And I think that my mom and her had created this sort of self-sealing environment where my mother was making these calls to El Moria and then asking Erin, what do you see? And then Erin would tell my mother what she thought my mother wanted to hear. So it was an endless loop. Remember how I talked about in part 1, how God is ego projected outward? So that happens with an individual where their own thoughts go outward, they project them onto a God, and then they think they're getting divine inspiration coming back. By the end, it was my sister who was really her seer and who was kind of anchoring a lot of these prophecies. I think it was her that came up with the 7 months and 7 year scenario, which was biblical. I think it was her that came up with the dates for the final shelter drills that we had. So at that point, I don't know if you could say if my mother really believed it. She set up a system that she became a part of where she's kind of putting out expectations. Erin is fulfilling those expectations, and they're both acting as if these messages are coming from God.
Got it.
Now for something a little less culty, a quick sponsor message. Sponsor break's done. Back for more culty stories. You were feeling these things but couldn't voice them, probably put them on your shelf. I'm sure you've heard that, the metaphor of the shelf breaking. Have you heard that metaphor?
Yes, I have. And I did put them on the shelf because, again, I lived there. I had, 2 children at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and then I had a third child. And, so my life is there.
Yep.
When you're completely dependent on a cult, you tend to avoid questioning it because you're questioning the thing that sustains you, right?
No judgment from us.
This was my job. This was my life.
We understand this probably more than anybody. I'm leading the audience through the series of things that eventually cause your shelf to break, which was what might be a seemingly trivial thing, but your shelf's really heavy by the time you have this near-beer experience. You've had all these betrayals, all these things that don't align with you and your values, things that have caused you to doubt, but you can't fully face.
Speaking about the cognitive dissonance and the cognitive rupture, okay, there were times during when we were building the shelters where I saw the amount of money that was being spent. I saw the amount of work that was going on, and I saw how we completely neglected our publicity and our outreach programs during that time. And everything was directed toward this survival effort. And I thought to myself, if this war doesn't happen, the church is basically fucked. So I had those thoughts. And so when the final drill happened and, it became obvious that this war wasn't imminent. There was nothing going on in the world that would have indicated that there was any nuclear war going to happen. And I did have a lot of rage about that. And I did kind of think to myself, we're fucked. But I couldn't voice that. I couldn't really tell my mother how I was feeling.
Of course.
It just planted this seed of doubt. So I started looking at everything differently. But then, of course, when we started to do outreach again, we started to plan tours, we started doing recordings and making television programs again. We started doing all the stuff that we had previously been doing. So I just kind of disappeared into that. And the overall community, became a little more relaxed. Now instead of working, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, we're back to like 10 or 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, right? So people have some time to go do other activities. And we had a group of musicians and actors who started putting on plays at our restaurant, and we started doing more public-facing activities. We invited people for open house to the ranch and started trying to maintain better relationships with our neighbors, who were really freaked out by the whole shelter episode, by the way.
I bet, yeah.
So we were down to like a big public relations hole. We had to really start trying to rebuild the relationships with the people of Montana. And so that was the sort of genesis of this near beer incident, because we started carrying non-alcoholic wine and beer in our general store, which was, something that we'd never done before. And where's the harm in that, right? There's no alcohol. It may look like a bottle of beer, but it isn't. And the very conservative members of my cult were upset that people were drinking beer, right? But it wasn't beer. It had no alcohol. So somehow this ended up in one of my mother's and Aaron's clearance sessions. And I think they both decided through whatever process of talking to El Moria or whatever that, this wasn't appropriate. So then my mother gives a dictation, and El Moria announces in the dictation that there's no more near beer allowed. And I was in the front row for that dictation, and it really freaked me out because I had heard from Aaron's husband that this was under discussion. And so now something that I knew for a fact was political and was something that had been discussed as an issue in the community was now coming through the spiritual channel. This is not just my mother saying, hey, I think it would be a good idea, if you really want to be on the spiritual path, don't drink near beer. It wasn't like that. No, it was, she made the decision, and then this edict comes out in this dictation, and which I knew was irrevocable. Once it comes from the altar, that's it. It's that for all time. If my cult went on for 500 years, people still wouldn't be able to drink near beer. So I'm like, okay, this brands us as religious extremists. It's an innocent thing. It's harmless. And yet, we're deciding based on appearances that this shouldn't happen. I was upset. And when my mom came off the altar, I ran back to her sacristy and I said, how could you do that? And she's like, I had to. There were empty beer bottles piling up in trash cans all over the place. It's just not appropriate for a spiritual community. And I'm like, but there's no alcohol. There's no harm being done. It's just appearances. And she's like, well, I don't mind if you drink near beer.
Oh.
And in that moment, I'm like, okay, you're abusing your spiritual office.
Mm-hmm.
You're just making this shit up as you go along. And I knew that was like the moment when the whole illusion shattered. Like,
wow.
You would think it would have happened when the war didn't occur, but this was proof positive that I, from my own personal experience, talking to Aaron's husband, hearing about this question, and then hearing it from the altar, it's like, you guys just decided this isn't El Moria. This is you. You're
right.
El Moria.
Right.
That's when I realized that's when the whole illusion shattered for me. And I honestly, I couldn't care less about near beer. That wasn't the point.
No. It usually is some trivial thing. If you read our book, and we'll send it to you as a thank you when we're done with it.
I'd love that.
Yeah, there's a couple moments of other people sharing the random things that cause their shelf to break,
It's also dear to you too. So
Yeah.
it's also, it's your one little...
It's a great story. It's a great story.
Yeah,
I love
it's
it.
a great, perfect example.
And thank you for sharing it. Now,
Sure.
Your book goes into great detail about your exit. It wasn't I'm out of here situation. You left, you came back, you left again, which is very common. What do you think is important for people to know in terms of that journey for you? And how did you get your life back?
Okay, well, I think my situation was fairly unique because, like Lane Camp or anyone who's born into an organization run by their parents, I didn't have any outside support system.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any friends. I didn't have parents outside the cult. So, when I was 20 and I left, it was huge. I mean, I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to make my way in the world. And what I learned is even though I did a pretty good job, I got work, I paid my bills, I was fine for 2 years outside the cult, but I wasn't mentally outside the cult. I had said, I don't want to be here. I rejected all these rules and beliefs and everything like that. But I still, in the back of my mind, the fear was still there. And specifically, the prophecies, the nuclear war prophecies. When I heard about those, well, Los Angeles was not a place to be. This is when the cult had sold their Los Angeles headquarters and was moving to Montana and pulling out of the city. And I was afraid to be in Los Angeles without everybody I had ever known. And so when everybody was pulling out, I was like, well, what am I going to do? And I worked it out with my mother to go back to college, to go to Northwestern, which is in Evanston, Illinois. And supposedly that was safer. I don't really know why. I mean, a nuclear bomb can hit Chicago just as easily as it can hit Los Angeles. But in her mythology, it was important to get away from the coasts because it was also the idea that the coast of California was going to go down, right? There was all this, she spiritualized natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, whatever. And she really convinced me and a lot of her followers that, Los Angeles might fall into the ocean. I mean, it's crazy as it sounds, right? So that prophecy really scared me into rejoining the cult. So this is 87, before the shelter period. Shelter drills happen in 1990, right? And I finally left for good at the end of 93. So that's kind of my trajectory there. And the near beer incident was sort of the pre-catalyst, but then the thing that actually made me leave was when it had to do with health insurance. The cult did not provide health insurance for any staff, and that included our family.
Wow.
And I was insisting at that point that I wanted a health plan, and my mom refused. And she, in fact, when I tried to buy my own health plan, she canceled my pay so that I couldn't. That was the final straw that broke the camel's back, because what it was is that I was wanting some independence for my family. I didn't want to have to rely on her generosity to take care of my kids or myself if we ever got sick. And even that level of autonomy, small autonomy of having a health plan, was too much for her. It's not like she couldn't afford it. It was $100 a month at the time.
Wow.
And so it was a point of control. And that's when I realized, okay, if I ever want control in my life, if I ever want to be able to, be in charge of my family and myself, I'm going to have to leave here.
And you did.
In a blizzard.
And I did. Yeah.
I do think you need to, I say this to a lot of our guests, make this into a film. You're making it into a documentary?
That's the plan right now. Yeah. We are in talks to do that.
I think you should. I'd love to see footage of that bunker, especially. And then you'll have to do a reenactment scene of leaving in a blizzard with all of your belongings, which was very dramatic.
It was dramatic. I mean, it felt dramatic. It was actually very physically hard to leave for various reasons, including the fact that our brakes froze on the truck.
Yeah. If someone were more spiritual, they might say that there was a spiritual force holding you back.
He was testing it. It was the test.
The final test.
Yeah.
The final test.
Well, you know what you find out after you leave a cult?
Yeah.
Is that life is a struggle in general.
Yeah.
So, you've spent all this time spiritualizing all these problems you have, and then you leave the cult and you're like, hey, this stuff happens to everybody.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So yeah, what's your deconstruction been like? How have you gotten your life back?
I like reconstructing better than
reconstruct.
deconstructing.
Deconstruct and then reconstruct. You've written this book, you've come to terms with your trajectory and really laid out your healing. What do you think is important for people to know, or what do you want people to know?
Well, as I go through in the book, cults are authoritarian, and that's their main characteristic. And that's something that we really have to keep in mind when we start seeing authoritarianism spreading in the world. And one of the things I was really happy about when I left there was not being a part of an authoritarian system and being a part of American democracy. I went from being a Republican to a Democrat. Of course, everybody in the cult voted Republican, and they still do. And that's kind of a characteristic of, you submit to God as part of the hierarchy, right? And so we build human hierarchies to sort of mimic that structure of, God, El Moria, the guru, the Chila, right? So in society, we have different hierarchies based on wealth, based on power. And that's what I began to understand. Just like bad things happen to people who aren't in cults, people who aren't in cults also build hierarchies and insist on hierarchies. There's a reason that we don't feed poor people. It's not because we can't afford it. It's just like my mom with the health insurance, right? It's about control. We need an underclass, right? People who are invested in hierarchy. So when I came out of the cult, it took me a little while to sort of apply that anti-hierarchy approach to politics, to life in general. But I think that's kind of my main takeaway is if you want to really get out of a cult, you have to deconstruct hierarchy across the board. You have to understand that nobody knows better than you. You're the best person to make decisions about your life. And, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It involves a little bit of rebellion. You can't knuckle under to someone telling you what to do. And that goes across the board. It is important to assert your rights as an individual, human rights and freedom of thought, freedom of conscience. And those are the things that will get you out of a cult. Now, for me, it was a multi-step process because I think when I left the cult, I probably still believed in God. I still believe that maybe these masters existed out there somewhere. Maybe my mom wasn't actually talking to them, but maybe they were still there. You can't dismantle a cosmology like that overnight.
No.
It takes time. And so it was probably about 4 or 5 years that it took me to finally have this moment of realization that this was all nonsense. And not just the masters, not just my parents' particular cult, but all cults and religions are destructive organizations. They, you don't need that. I think a lot of people who don't have strong identities, they tend to seek out community, right? But there are healthy communities. There are communities of interest. There are hobby groups. There are cosplayers. There are people who are into food. There are people who are into music. These are all constructive communities where people are helping each other and genuinely having a good time. But destructive communities are based on hierarchy, are based on submission, are based on unquestioned authority. And this is what people have to dismantle, the idea that there's some outside authority that they need to listen to for their salvation. And ultimately, I think people should, take the time you need to deconstruct gradually, because you may not be able to get all the way to saying there's no God, but you might be able to get to a place of saying this messenger, this priest, this pastor, this cult leader is not talking to God, is just a human being, doesn't know anything more about how you should live your life than you do, and probably less.
I grew up, God was always something I rolled my eyes at. I had a grandmother who came in with scripture and tried to read it to us. And the approach wasn't going to win me over. And I'm one of 4 boys. And I was like, thanks, Grandma, but no. And then I had another grandmother who went to the church later on in life after my grandfather died, in the 90s. And she ended up being kind of a marriage counselor. And it shifted my perspective a little bit. Religion's not all ridiculous. There's a community here. My grandmother has a second half to her life, really, almost 28 years. And she had a community and everyone loved her. And we would go to Arizona to visit her. We'd go to church, but I still was kind of going through the motions. And as I've gotten older, I don't necessarily look at church and religion as something that I want to do, but I've come to this place where there's something. It's personal, so I'll say that, but it's nothing out there that I feel like a God or anything that's helped me with it. It's just kind of a conclusion I've come to going, there's got to be something out there, and I'm more open to it, but I'm not necessarily open to going to church and hearing someone tell me what that kind of hierarchical thing. And I'm wondering, has it destroyed your faith? Do you still feel like there might be something there? And not in the traditional sense that you grew up with. I just wonder if it's totally not something you consider, because I felt like I started there and ended up a little bit more open, if that makes sense.
Well, the line between a benign community and a culty, sick community can be very fine, right? I think that there are a lot of pastors and priests, and leaders who do good work. They actually can help people who are at a certain stage in their development. I don't need that, but I think that there are some people who need to feel like there's someone they can go to.
Totally.
And if they're going through a divorce, or if a death or whatever it is, they need to sort of figure out what this means to them. And furthermore, I think that religion in an evolutionary sense has allowed the building of civilization. I think that when people believe in an external God, they tend to cooperate more.
Yeah, for sure.
And by the way, I don't say this enough, what my parents accomplished, I disagree with their methods, but they were able to marshal tens of thousands of people to contribute and to build an organization that had the tens of millions of dollars to build bomb shelters. And they both came from nothing.
Right.
They came from nothing, and they were able to build this organization. Now, do I think that's a good thing? No, we wasted that money, right? But in terms of it, it is proof positive that these belief systems create a level of cooperation that's probably not possible without it. And so in that sense, I understand that, I wish that we could figure out a way to build that level of cooperation without demonstrably false beliefs.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And, I mean, like, imagine if we could just put our trust in humanity, if we could put our trust in each other and build a society that was inclusive, that was supportive of everyone, that wasn't constantly looking for out groups. This is the human condition, is to try to figure out how to get the benefits that are provided by religions and cults in terms of cooperation without the abuses and drawbacks. And I don't know if it's possible.
I don't know either.
I'm with you.
I don't know either.
I agree.
As far as whether something is out there, like a god or a spirit, hell no. Are you kidding me? I mean, the universe is governed by the laws of physics, period. And if we can use testable methods and we find that there's some intelligence out there, great. Maybe there's aliens, maybe there's other civilizations. It's a vast place. We can't look everywhere. So there's so much we don't know about the universe. But whatever we're going to discover is going to come through the scientific method. It's not going to come through any religions or cult leaders theorizing about some spirit or something else that they can't put their finger on. That is a blind alley, the blindest of blind alleys.
Let's take a break from the cultiverse. Here's a word from our sponsors. Thanks for listening, everyone. Now let's dive back into the cultiverse.
It's so interesting because our cult was apparently scientific, measurable, reproducible.
That was the appeal to
Yeah. And all that stuff. So I've actually also gone the other way where I feel like, and as you're talking, when you say the universe and the physics, to me, and this is coming from somebody who was not raised religious. Like, I was like, I don't believe in God. There's no man in the sky. Like, what is that? But to me, when you describe the universe and cause and effect and all that, that to me is God. Like, that's whatever we are in is like
nature.
Nature is God. Like, so it's in many ways, I feel like we kind of
that's one of the nature and physics to me, or one of the
same beliefs in a way, but it's just different labels. I'm just in awe of like the world that we live in. And to me, that feeling is like the universe, God, life force, whatever. I just don't have that. There's no hierarchy over me. I don't put that above me. It's sort of like just connection to life, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it does get into semantics a little bit, right? I mean, if you want to call it God, that's fine. I think the word has a lot of baggage.
Yeah, as does cult.
And a few years of baggage.
If you understand evolution, notice I didn't say believe in evolution, because it's not a question of belief. It's
what
a
happened.
fact, right? Evolution is a fact. Gravity is a fact. Space, time, matter, energy, right? Those are all facts. And we learn more and more about them all the time. And if we're around in 100 years, we're going to know a hell of a lot more than we know today. But one way that I look at humanity is we are a sort of avenue of the universe becoming aware of itself, right? The universe was not conscious, just an explosion of matter and energy. And eventually billions of years go by and, we came along. Possibly thousands or millions of other civilizations throughout the universe came along, and life is the universe becoming aware of itself. And that, to me, is more awe-inspiring than any concept of God that humans have ever come up with.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll call it God. Which is so great, because that's, like I said in part one, that, one of the things we've really enjoyed in this podcast journey is talking to people with different perspectives and healing journeys. And I'm really curious, in yours, when did you put the cult label on your experience? And how did you come to terms with that and healed from that?
Well, it's funny because when I was in the cult, of course, we were always very upset at being labeled a cult.
Right.
And we got into, some of our people were deprogrammed at one point or another. And we were very upset about that. And we thought that it was, and I still don't like deprogramming. You're kidnapping people, right? So that's all very bad. It's not a good way to get people out of cults. But, we were upset about it for different reasons when I was in there, and we called it faith breaking. And of course, I think faith should be broken because if you have faith in something that doesn't exist or can't be verified, you're going to be led astray. So in terms of that, yeah, I mean, it probably took 5 or 10 years before I was at a cult. I think the 5-year mark was when I became the atheist. I still thought of it as my former church. And then eventually I started going, yeah, that was a cult. And I was in a cult and I was raised in a cult. And I sort of began to take on that identity. It's funny because I became a creative professional. I had been involved in doing the TV production for the cult. And so when I left, I went right into the industry. And so I was doing that for the last 30 years or so. And I would get into conversations with producers and various, people I was working for. And when I would tell them the story, they're like, you got to write a book about this. So I finally did. But it became clear. First, I was afraid to talk about it. I didn't want people to know my background. But once I started feeling that people were fascinated and they accepted me, and it wasn't like shameful, then I could talk about it. And that's when I started, being a little more casual and referring to it as, my cult or the cult, right? And it became sort of a little humorous.
Yeah.
And I could laugh about it because it no longer had its hooks in me.
Well, it's also a different era now, don't you think? Like with all the documentaries and podcasts, and like it's almost trendy to be in a cult. People are excited about it.
Well, the process of coercion has happened to a lot of people, which is why I think a lot of people can relate. They don't go full-blown cult, but they go, oh my God, some of the stuff you're saying makes sense. And that would have been me maybe. And I think that's where, to your point, it unites us all and we can all kind of understand what that coercive, dogmatic looks like.
You talking in your book about no one being immune, and I wrote a chapter of the same title with Sight Unseen, right? Like we're both aware of how this works. And so it's not as much coercion as it is desire. People get into cults based on their desires. Nobody forces anyone to join a cult. And they don't usually see it as a cult when they're in the process of joining it.
No, Sean, it's the single reason I still do the pod, just because I still think people think they're immune. Yeah.
I was talking to Kathleen Mann, who is sadly passed away, but she was she's got her PhD in psychology, and she had great insights on cults. And I have a really good interview with her. And she said that smart people are more susceptible because they believe they can't be fooled.
Yes.
And that to me that's the smoking gun right there. How desire overcomes truth. We see that in the MAGA cult. I mean, these people are being tremendously hurt by Trump every single day, and they double down because they want so badly for it all to be true.
And going back to what you said a couple of minutes ago, you said, is there desire? In our book, we talk about situational vulnerabilities, like, certain being at a crossroads, being out of school, being in between things. That in combination with the thing that you would want. In our book, we call it the hooks. You can't say it's just on people's desires. It's a combination of, cult leaders understanding those desires, understanding those hooks, offering something that seems appealing. People don't join a cult. They join something good. What are they joining? Something they think is going to give them the thing that they want. And I think that's really what is the new, at least for me in this whole 4-year journey, that's the definition. There's a bait and switch. You think you're getting salvation. You think you're getting personal success. You think you're getting a new hot body, whatever it is that you're signing up for. Yeah. And it's not. It's a trick.
Yeah, I'm not letting the cult leader off the hook, by the way.
Okay, good.
Once a cult leader is aware that, for example, we're selling the ascension. Well, nobody makes their fucking ascension, okay? I mean, that's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's the idea of, I'm on the path to my ascension, which means all you other poor suckers are not with me, right? I'm better than you. That is the key to the desire. The cult leader tells you that you're better than other people, and you want to believe that. What I really want to say about this idea of the universe as God, okay, that's fine, but I saw myself in the cult as being at the center of the universe, at the pivot point, at the nexus of all, of all good in the universe. And because I was the prince, right? I mean, my mother was the messenger, and all these ascended masters, like, I could do no wrong. I was at the center of all this. Well, leaving that environment, all of a sudden, the universe is not like a stage where I'm at the center of. It's just a place where I exist. And it's a story that I'm a part of, but I'm not the center of it. And I think we see that as with humanity, right? Everybody thought the Earth was the center of the universe. It's not. It's an ordinary planet around an ordinary star near the end of an arm of a spiral galaxy, right? So it's like, I think it's the decentering of yourself and of the cult leader from, being the most significant thing in the universe. And that is, again, as I said before, getting rid of the ego to the extent that it is messianic and inflated, right? We all need a healthy ego to maintain boundaries so that we're not abused, so we can fit into society. We can differentiate ourselves from society. But once that ego gets so big that you feel like you're the center of the universe and that the stage is just for you, now you're narcissistic. It's mentally unhealthy. And this traumatizes people. How do you go from feeling like the center of the universe to being just an ordinary human?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't navigate that journey, it can throw you into depression. Your marriages can break up. You can, it's a very hard come down.
Tell us a little bit about where people can find you, your book, what you're doing now.
Well, I just published a book in May called My Cult, Your Cult, and I also released the audiobook. And I think that what I've covered in this podcast is maybe about a tenth of what's in that book. And I think that the book it's not just my story. It also goes into a lot of other cults in the world, particularly Trumpism and MAGA. And it also just really explores the psychology of all of this. And I think it will be helpful to people who may be stuck in these groups. I think it'll be helpful to people who may have family who they've lost to some group. And I hope that you read it and enjoy it.
We read the whole thing, both of us, and I do recommend the Audible. It's a unique compilation of your voice and voices of ex-members, and we didn't even touch on sort of a through line of the book, which is the trial of one of the ex-members and how eventually your cult unraveled. So we'll direct people towards the book if they want to know those details, and eventually the documentary. I really hope that comes out.
It's a series.
Or a series, docu-series. Yeah, I really appreciate the time with you. It's like I said at the beginning, it's kind of exciting to be to talk to somebody who's a kin of a cult legend, if I may.
Well, it's a privilege to be on, and I thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please keep in touch. Okay, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that as much as we did. What did you think, Nippy? What was your big
I thought
takeaway?
He pussed out when I was talking about.
Jeez, you can't say that.
I know. I'm just kidding.
The one thing I didn't get to ask a couple of questions. I want to know what's the state of the bunker, like what happened with all that. Another thing we didn't get into was how much the book really covered a whole legal aspect of what happened in Cut and how it was eventually brought down, mostly because of this one juror that decided not to.
There's a few niche episodes we could go into.
Yeah, I mean, you could do a whole limited series on Cut.
Read the book.
This is just the beginning of it. One thing I didn't get to say is that there was a time when they got a bunch of gear when Osho's Sannyasin community fell apart, the Bhagwan Rajneesh community. What's it called? Wild Country. You know what I'm talking about. They fell apart and they Cut received a bunch of their tractors and I guess work.
It's a cult trade-off.
Yeah, well, they got Osho sloppy seconds. That's really what I wanted to say. I mean, I had so many notes we didn't even get to. So just read the book, let us know what you think, and see you next time on A Little Bit Culty. All right?
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
We hope you're enjoying A Little Bit Culty. If so, please do show us some love. Drop a rating or leave a review. Hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty.
Even better, send this episode to someone who needs it. Maybe they're in a cult. Maybe they're just a little bit susceptible. Or maybe they just love a good story. Spread the word, spread the love. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production.
Executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound. Our co-creator is Jess Temple Tardy.
Our production coordinator is Leslie Dinsmore.
Writing by Sandra Namoto and social media marketing by Eric Swarzinski and Brooke Keene.
Our theme song, Cultivated, is by the artists John Bryant and Nigel Aslan.